Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Tevis-Finn recording from Franklin on a Friday night. So I want you guys to look at the West Part 1 in your folder on Edline, and we're going to go through the two pages that start with boomtowns and it ends with ranching. So under number 1, let's get right in to boomtowns. So I have pictured here the first one in Virginia City, Nevada. So you want to put down a little history under boomtowns, guys. Henry Comstock, he was a prospector, right, looking for gold, and he couldn't find it, so he was really frustrated and sold his claim. He didn't realize that what he had dug up was this blue-gray clay, and it, frustrated him, but it turned out to be silver ore. So the next bullet, guys, news of his discovery was, it's called a strike, and it brought a flood of miners. So many people arrived that Nevada became the 36th state. So almost overnight, this tiny frontier town became a city. So you guys can put down Virginia City had 30,000 people in just a few months. It had culture. It had like an opera house, shops where you could get things from Europe. It had newspapers and a 6-story hotel. So after you put down the examples for Virginia City, just note that so many people arrived that Nevada became the 36th state, and then this Comstock lode, you can put down, generated more than $230 million. It helped us finance the Civil War. So this pattern repeated itself throughout the American West. The pattern is, you guys, news of a strike would start a stampede, and then overnight this rapid growth towns would just blossom. So the term refers to rapid economic growth. And these were pretty rowdy places. I have two pictures here. So when I say rowdy, you guys can put down that prospectors would fight over claims, very territorial. People would, haunt the streets and trails to try to steal. And so you guys can put down law and order was enforced by, I have it spelled here for you guys, a vigilance committee. So just note the warning here. So you can just put down that law and order would be enforced by these self-appointed volunteers. They would track down people trying to punish the guilty and to instill order in a lawless place. So men would arrive first to these places, but women would soon follow, and they would work in laundries or as cooks. But I have some pictured here on the right, and they would work at hurdy-gurdy houses. The hurdy-gurdy was a mechanical violin of the time, and there they would waitress and maybe dance for the price of a drink. Yet boomtowns could not last forever, so when the mines were used up, sometimes people would move on. So I have one pictured here. It's just completely empty. So you guys can put down one example. In Virginia City, remember, was huge. Their economy completely collapsed once the mine closed, and it shrunk to only a city of 500 people. So many were just completely abandoned, like this one here. The next important point is that mining leads to statehood. So guys, it really means that the discovery of gold and silver and some other precious minerals really build our nation from the mid-1840s, 1850, all the way until the end of the 1800s. So I want you to put down the following states. You can abbreviate if you'd like. So we have California, Nevada, Idaho, Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, pictured here below, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So that's just rapid growth for our country, adding states. So one of the West's most famous boom towns was Leadville. So what you want to put down for a little bit of history of Leadville, it was in Colorado, and gold and silver was found in the mountains in Colorado, but deep beneath the surface were extracts of lead, and this attracted sometimes up to 1,000 new prospectors a week. So the city really grew huge. So next bullet, this spurred the development of building the railroad, through the Rocky Mountains, and it really transformed Denver. So I have a picture here. It became the second largest city in the West after San Francisco. Denver used just to be a supply place for mining, and it really grew because of the railroads and because of the mining. And their baseball team recognizes their history of mining, for their name, nickel and slot. One last thing under number 2, guys, is that silver was found in Tombstone. Tombstone is in the Arizona Territory. This boom lasted about 10 years. It really became famous for its lawlessness because of so many people. There was a famous gunfight, which you guys will look up for your photojournal, between Marshal Wyatt Earp and his brothers in the famous gunfight at the OK Corral. So that was 1881. So we'll do a little bit more research on that famous gunfight. Alright guys, on to the second page for mining technology. Because mining really transformed our country, I do want you to know some of the methods. So early prospectors, for that first bullet, really just use something called placer mining. So they would just find their spot. They would use picks, shovels, and pans. So sluice mining, guys, they would actually divert the current of a river called a sluice, and they'd form these trenches. And then the water would be directed into like a heavy box with a screen, so that the heavier minerals would settle to the bottom, and using a screen to make sure it didn't escape. So that's the sluices. And then hydraulic is pictured here, and this is high pressure water sprayed against mountains or even hills, and that pressure, guys, would wash away dirt and gravel and rock and expose the minerals underneath the surface. So just note those 3 methods and put down the definitions. And so to conclude this, it had a devastating effect, unfortunately. So you guys can put down that millions and tons of silt, sand, and gravel were washed into local rivers. So that sediment would cause floods and destroy farmland. So it really did cause quite a bit of problems with the local government. And so in conclusion, guys, by the late 1800s, most mining had moved to quartz mining, the kind that you're probably most familiar with, in which deep mine shafts are dug and miners go underground to extract the minerals. Alright guys, so let's finish up with number 4, ranching and cattle drives. So Americans, besides the mining that drew them out west, they also moved to the Great Plains. And you want to note that the Great Plains had long been thought, to be an impossible region, especially to raise cattle, for water was scarce, and cattle from the east definitely could not survive on the tough grasses I have pictured here that grew along the prairie. But here, pictured below, is our hero, the Texas Longhorn. So you guys want to just put a little bit of history down under that bullet, that it was descended from Spain, and they had been allowed to run wild, and this breed, that grew lean and rangy, could survive the harsh climate. And so up to 5 million, by the mid to late 1860s, roamed in Texas. And so next bullet, guys, is cattle ranching really prospered because of the Civil War and because of the railroad. So those 2 things, guys, the slaughterhouses would bring huge amounts of cattle in order to feed the armies of the Union and the Confederacy. So it would help beef prices soar, and so ranchers really grew quite wealthy during that time period. And so next bullet, guys, after the Civil War, ranchers and livestock dealers realized that if they could move the cattle as far as the railroad, those longhorns could be sold for a big profit and be shipped east to market. And so how would they move the cattle? It's called the long drive. You want to note the first long drive was not successful. About 260,000 longhorns didn't make the journey. So soon, though, there became these trails I have pictured here on the map. And so the famous trail known as the Chisholm Trail came from Abilene, Kansas, and it would meet the railroads up here. So it would start in southern Texas and move its way northward. And so this would be quite a sight to see. Cowboys from the major ranches would go north with these herds along the trail. Sometimes the only way to tell the herds apart, would be the brands that they burned onto their hides. And here's a fun vocabulary word. Stray calves were called mavericks, that they would have to then be sought out and branded. Herds could number anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000. And so conflict is headed our way because all these different groups of people, herders and ranchers, were fighting for territory and competing for land. So range wars would break out where farmers and ranchers would compete for land. And so as barbed wire was invented, there were the pros and cons of this invention. So, barbed wire could keep out those competing with them for land and also keep their animals safe and close to sources of food and water. The disadvantages of barbed wire is that it really abandoned the open grazing. And so cowboys, no longer were needed, and the long cattle drives soon ended. And so the cattle industry certainly does not go away, but it does change. Prices in the mid-1880s start to plummet because of more competition from Europe. And also, guys, I have pictured here, it's very sad, but there was a huge blizzard. I have a little headline here from the actual newspaper that, thousands of cattle froze or starved to death. And so that also affected the prices. Alright, guys, so I am concluding. These notes I made a little bit more challenging. You guys had to do a little bit more writing, so please make sure you go back and you can pause and fill things in and listen again. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you all Monday morning. Good night, y'all.